What's up guys, Asian here again with another Elsewhere video, and today we're going to be taking a second look at Perfected False Gods Devotion, comparing it to the current meta sets in the game right now. Specifically, we're taking a look at comparing it to Siroria, just because in ideal scenarios, Siroria is actually the strongest set that you could use in the game right now before Elsewhere is released. So there's been a lot of discussion about how magicka DPS are basically going to be playing out in Elsewhere, because there's been a lot of changes that have kind of been hitting magicka DPS a little bit more than stamina DPS has, or at least in different ways. So stamina DPS obviously have seen the introduction of Whirling Blades as a quasi-execute ability for those classes that don't have a Killer's Blade, basically. So that's one thing that stamina DPS has been taking struggling with, I should say kind of adapting to, it's a better way, not necessarily struggling with. Magicka DPS also have their own sort of issues, and it's not really from any skills that are introduced, it's more from a set that has been introduced. The set that I'm talking about is False Gods Devotions. So when it was first announced way back, maybe about a month and a half ago, a lot of us kind of brushed it off because we didn't know that there was going to be a perfected version of False Gods. We suspected that there might be a perfected version, but at the time there was no confirmation that there was a perfected version. But once we saw Perfected False Gods Devotion, we kind of keyed in a little bit more on this and figured out that it's actually a fairly decent set to run, especially given into consideration the other changes that have been made to the game. So right here, this is Perfected False Gods Devotions. This comes from Vet Sunspire. You do not have to do hard mode to get the perfected drops at all, so you can just do normal Vet and you'd be able to get these perfected pieces perfectly fine. So you can see here, it's just basically the magicka version of Vicious Ophidians. So it adds spell crit minus Slayer's spell crit, and then it adds 129 spell damage, 1096 max magicka, and reduces the cost of your magicka abilities by 8%. So that kind of trifecta of 5-piece bonuses is what really makes Perfected False Gods Devotion really stand out. The normal version, the imperfect version that you get from running normal Sunspire, is probably not going to be all that great because it is missing that max magicka bonus on that 5-piece that the Perfected version does have. And that's what really kind of sets it apart here. So it gets basically more or less 3 armor bonuses for the price of 1. So you get the spell damage, you get the max magicka, and you get the magicka cost reduction, which is actually very, very strong because obviously being able to sustain a full light attack rotation does contribute to your overall DPS. So the better you're able to sustain, the more DPS you'll be able to do, or at the very least the higher your ceiling, theoretical ceiling, is going to be. So a lot of people right now are taking a look at False Gods Devotion as kind of a replacement set for those fights where Siroria might not necessarily be very useful. So for example, Asylum Sanctorium, Cloud Rest, potentially even Sunspire. In those fights, False Gods Devotion is actually looking to be pretty comparable to sets like Mother Sorrow and Mechanical Acuity. Now, what other people are taking a look at is, in the best case scenario, in those fights where you can use Siroria, so for example, like some of the fights in Maw, a lot of the fights in Halt's Fabrication, does False Gods Devotion stand up to Siroria? And there are a couple of caveats with these sort of comparisons, because you can't really just slap both of these sets on a High Elf and say, okay, False Gods Devotion is better than Siroria. So a lot of people are trying to basically more or less find the best case scenario for both sets, so for False Gods Devotion and Siroria. So what people have come up with is a couple of scenarios. So there's 3 that involve the Altmer, and then there's 1 that involves a Breton. So for False Gods Devotion, it is best suited on a High Elf or a Dark Elf because they don't have any sort of additional sustain passive. We want to compare that to the Breton, which has a 7% magicka cost reduction built into their racial passive, which is the closest identical thing to False Gods Devotion. So the Bretons basically have that 5-piece already built into their racial passive, which allows them to use Siroria a little bit more effectively, or at least that's how the theory is. That's kind of the thinking is. So what it basically boils down to is, with the High Elf or the Dark Elf, you basically have 3 possible scenarios, all of which involve False Gods Devotion. So obviously, when you're running False Gods Devotion, you might want to run regen food as well, or you could run bistat food. So those are basically the 3 different scenarios. So you have 2 scenarios with the regen food, one with the health enchant on a large piece, one with the health enchant on a small piece in order to make up for that loss in health because you are running a regen food. Then you have bistat food, which will result in a change in your back bar enchant. So with the regen food, that allows you to run the berserker enchant on your back bar. With the bistat food, because you no longer have that regen, you will need to run an absorb magicka glyph on the back bar now in order to get that regen back while running False God's Devotion. And then finally you have the Bretons, where you'll be running Siroria and you'll be running bistat food because you already had the 7% additional cost reduction built into your passives. So why are we taking a look at Double-Bladed Mara rather than your typical blue food? So you'll notice here that I don't actually have blue food, I am running Double-Bladed Mara instead, and that's because food has been changed in elsewhere as well. So a lot of the purple and gold unique foods, so foods that you get from holiday events or you get from quests like in Rothgar or Somerset, those have actually been buffed a little bit. So you can see here Double-Bladed Mara increasing magicka by 52.97 and max health by 58.52, and elsewhere. Want to compare that to the base game blue food. Base game blue food boosts health by 53.95 and max magicka by 49.36. So Double-Bladed Mara is going to be stronger. There is one other food, if you don't like the idea of drawing your vamp every single time you have to eat food, that's going to be Arteum Pickled Fishbowl, which increases max health by 56.52 and max magicka by 51.17. Again, a little bit stronger than blue food, but not quite as strong as Clockwork Citrus, I should say, Double-Bladed Mara. Now, on the same vein, the regen foods were nerfed. So that's Arteum Takeaway Broth, Clockwork Citrus Fillet, and then Witchmother's Potent Brew, and Dubious Comoran Throne. So they had their regen buffed. So where's who's Clockwork Citrus Fillet right here? So max health is 33.26. Health regen is 406, max magicka is 3080, magicka regen is 338. So the regens were buffed a little bit, but the max resources were nerfed down by about 10% or so. So you do get less max health, you get less max magicka running Clockwork now compared to how it is on live. So that's really where the kind of food comes into play. So without further ado, I'm going to just show you guys the parses themselves. So basically what I did was I basically swapped out the body sets as well as the race. So I just used False God's Devotion on a Dark Elf here. I'm on a Magplar, just because Magplar traditionally have one of the worst sustain in the game, probably matched only by Sorks. Running Zahn, Spell Strategist, the front bar was Precise Flame Damage, the back bar was Maelstrom Inferno Staff, infused either Absorb Magicka or Berserker Enchant, depending on the food that I was using. So for example here I'm running Double-Bladed Mara, as you can tell from my health. So I have all max magicka enchants, and then on my back bar I have that Absorb Magicka enchant. Now I also used Clockwork Citrus Fillet, in which case I basically ran two different scenarios. So the first one was the health enchant on the large piece, gave us a little bit more health. Second scenario was health enchant on the small piece, magicka enchant back on the large piece, gives us a little bit less health, but more max magicka. Everything else remained exactly the same. The back bar, because we were running regen food, changed to a Berserker enchant from an Absorb Magicka enchant. And then for the Breton test, basically instead of running False God's Devotion on the body, I ran Perfect Siroria instead. All max magicka enchants, and again we were running Double-Bladed Mara here because it is the best bistat food. And on the back bar, because we were a Breton, we were running a Berserker enchant on the back bar, and I'll show you guys that on the parses themselves. So here are all the parses. So starting off first here, this is a Clockwork Citrus Fillet with the health enchant on the large piece. We have the Berserker enchant here. Did 76.6k. We are rounding to the up to the closest 100th. And the next parse I did was 75.9k. Again, same thing, max health enchant on the large piece, Clockwork Citrus Fillet, Berserker enchant. So our health here was about 17.9k, almost 18k. This is with minor toughness, but without Ebon. So if we did have Ebon, we'd add in another about 1500 or so. Should be sitting around 19.5k or so once we have Ebon involved. So pretty decent health overall, not that big of a loss here. Now, this is the health enchant on the small piece. We have the max magicka enchant on the large piece now. Max health dropped down a little bit to 17,200. So again, with Ebon, we would add in about another 1,500 or so. So we'd be sitting at around 18.7k or so. Again, very respectable health, perfectly fine for vet trials. Clockwork Citrus Fillet, Berserker enchant, again, magicka on the large piece, health on the small piece here. 77.3k and 77.6k. So, moving on here, this is the Breton. So you can see here we are a Breton with this parse compared to Dark Elf on this parse here. So I only managed to save one parse. I did not manage to save the other parse, but I do have a screenshot of the sustain, which we'll be going over separately in a little bit here, which showed about 77k or so. So 78 78.9k here. Max health was 20,000.1. And again, this is with minor toughness without Eben, so with Eben, add on another 1.5k, we'd be sitting at about 21.6k health. So very, very beefy with the Breton. Again, Berserker enchant here. And we have regen versus drain, and I'll show you guys the actual sustain graphs in a little bit here. And then this is again Dark Elf here. Now instead of the regen food, we're running Double Bloody Mara, but we are not running the Berserker glyph. We are running Absorb Magicka instead. 78 almost flat, then 76.4k. So max health basically identical to the Breton, so 20.2k. 20.1k without Eben, so again with Eben 21.6, 21.7k health or so. Pretty nice overall, but you will notice that our spell resistance was a little bit higher on our Breton. We have a little bit more beefiness with the Bretons compared to on a Dark Elf or even a High Elf. So taking a look at regen versus drain for a second now. So again, this is the Absorb Magicka with the Double Blooded Mara, so 1451 compared to 1497 and 1496 compared to 1508. So if we take a look at the graph form, which is going to be a little bit better to take a look at, see here that we did have dropped pretty close to 25% here, but we never really were in danger of running out of magicka. Same thing here with the other parts. This was a little bit better actually, even though it did end up doing a little bit less DPS, or sustain was a little bit better. Now for the Breton parts, I will have to pull up two images here because LUA errors all around. So this is the first parse here. I believe this is the 78.9k. You can see here sustain is a little bit worse compared to the Double Bladed Mara on the Dark Elf with the Absorb Magicka enchant, but very similar to that. Even though we are dipping below 25% here, we were never really in danger of running out of max magicka. And then with the second parse here, this is the parse that I didn't manage to save here, and you can see here that we pulled probably around 77k or so. A very similar story here where we dropped below 25% several times here, but we were never really in danger of running out of magicka. We never really dipped below maybe 10-15% max magicka here. So again, a little bit harder to sustain. This is the Breton with the Berserker enchant running bistat food. So a little bit harder to sustain, but overall, again, not really too much to worry about, particularly when we start using J-Beam and our drain ends up going down a fair amount, because then we don't really have to worry about maintaining other dots and things. Now with the False God's Devotion, with the Berserker enchant, so these all pretty much tell the exact same story, which is we never really dipped below 50% magicka at all. Our sustain was really, really nice, and even during execute, we pretty much had very, very high, almost over 75% magicka the entire time. The exact same story across pretty much all the False God's Devotions parses, except for obviously the one with bistat food. So with regen food, we are definitely over-sustaining, I'd say. You can see here that we never dip below 50% max magicka, which on the one hand is good because we never really have to worry about losing magicka, but on the other hand, you also have to consider, are we over-sustaining or not? And in some of these parses, we're not really over-sustaining all too much. You can see here we did manage to hit 100% on 2 instances here on this parse. None over here, maybe here, maybe just for a second or so. Over here, not really hitting 100%, and on this fourth parse, we did hit 100% once. So the idea behind over-sustaining is you don't want to be sitting at 100% max resources. So here, we're basically fluctuating kind of between this sort of 80 to 50% mark, which is pretty decent, pretty alright. Take a look here, you can see here that overall, this isn't also not a bad graph at all, because again, we're not really dipping below 25% at all, we're not really hitting rock bottom at all. But you can see here it does end up going a little bit lower, down, down, down. If this fight were to take a little bit longer, then we would end up risking bottoming out our magicka. Versus here with False God's Devotion, with regen food, we don't really have that danger. So even if this fight went on for quite a while, we should be in pretty good shape overall in terms of magicka. So in this sort of short-ish fight, again, this fight is on the raid dummy, which is about 4.5 minutes long, which is a little bit long for some fights, but is also kind of short compared to things like Asylum or Cloud Rest. So for these sort of like medium length fights, your sustain is actually pretty decent. For the longer fights, False God Devotion and regen food is obviously going to be best for sustain overall. But in terms of just raw damage, it does seem like running bistat food is the way to go, and making up for that regen either by becoming a Breton or using Absorb Magicka enchant on the back bar here. So you do have several options. If you take a look at the overall picture here though, you can see that it's not that big of a difference. Obviously with the regen food in False God's Devotion, you're going to want to avoid putting that health enchant on a large piece. Again, 18-ish, 18.5k health or so, with the health enchant on the small piece, with Ebon and Toughness. So that's perfectly fine for Vet Trial, so you really don't need to put that health enchant on the large piece. So if you ignore these two parses, you can see here that the disparity here is actually not that big. But yes, we did have one really bad parse here with the bistat food with False Gods of Devotion, but overall pretty similar. So you can see here the Breton with bistat compared to High Elf, or I should say Dark Elf with bistat running Absorb Magicka, about a little bit more than 1%, about a 1% difference in DPS. So overall, your choice is basically whether or not you want the additional sustain with bistat and Absorb Magicka, or if you just want to go with Bretons instead. I personally would probably say go with Dark Elves and High Elves, because a lot of the fights in the game are actually going to be shorter than these fights here. Again, this is a 4.5 minute long fight. A lot of fights end up taking closer to about 2 to 3 minutes. So in those instances, obviously your sustain is going to be less of an issue because the fights are going to not take quite as long. In those instances, I would just say go with High Elf or Dark Elf with a bistat food, maybe an Absorb Magicka Engine if you're really concerned about sustain. But overall, it does seem like you have a lot of options here when it comes to combinations of races and foods. So that is it for this video. I hope you guys found this informative. Please let me know down in the comment section below if you think I might have messed up the methodology a little bit, or if there's anything else you would like me to test. Again, hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.